Okay. Okay, we're back now. So
Great.
for any new viewers who just joined us, we just heard from Cameron Adams, co-founder of Canva, and is part of the CCSOC and Entrepreneur Society Startup Week. Now, we're excited to move on to the second part of this live stream and introduce another very special guest tonight. Today, we have Cameron Ensor, who is the Student Fellowship Associate at Startmate, which is a member of the Blackbird Ventures family, is at the epicenter for startup ambition across Australia and New Zealand, running fellowships and accelerators in the startup ecosystem. Coming up, Cam will be explaining a bit more about VC firms like Blackbird and accelerators like Startmate and how they interact with startups, what they're looking for so you can build the next Canva, along with how you can get more involved in startups through programs that Startmate offers. Before we dive into some questions, remember that you can use the same slider link to submit any questions that you have for Cam and to upvote any questions that you really want to get answered. It says there'll be a short Q&A session at the end of closer to about 7:15 or so. So thanks for coming on the live stream, Cam.
Great. No, thanks so much for having me, Ethan and Amanda. It's great to be here. Cam's always a hard act to follow, but I'm really glad that you could have me along tonight.
Yes, we're very happy to have you here. Okay, to start us off, could you tell us a little bit about Startmate and Blackbird, just briefly explain, and maybe a bit about what they do for students who may not know much about venture capital?
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, just for context, so as Cam was mentioning before, it used to be a lot harder to actually start a company in Australia. So a lot of our top talent in Australia used to have to actually go overseas to get funding to actually create these amazing companies like we have Canva today. So Startmate was actually founded back in 2011 by a guy called Nicky Shavak. Nicky's original thinking here was that we were losing all this amazing talent and having all this amazing ambition in our local ecosystem, but it was just getting lost to all these overseas markets. So what happened was Nicky actually created Startmate. Now what Startmate is Startmate was traditionally a startup accelerator, which essentially means it invests in early stage startups and helps try to accelerate their growth, connect them up with the right sort of people and get them to that next stage of growth. So Startmate's transitioned a lot through the years, and I'll be touching on that throughout our talk tonight. But so Startmate is what we now like to refer kind of as the epicenter of ambition in the startup ecosystem, which the reason why it's not really a traditional accelerator in a way is it touches on a number of different areas. So more traditionally, we saw startups requiring just money to raise funds and then accelerate their growth. But then we kind of looked outside of that and saw what else do startups really need to thrive. And then two other things which came up there was they need amazing people to hire. I think Cam mentioned it before, but one of the tricky things about scaling a company is you need to bring in all these amazing people. So Startmate's actually grown to incorporate our fellowship programs, as well as things like First Believers. So we're a bit of a different kind of company. With regards to Blackbird now, so Blackbird's actually the parent company of Startmate. So Nicky and Rick Baker, following creating Startmate, actually went on to found Blackbird. So Blackbird was an early investor in Canva and a number of other really great companies such as CultureAmp, Zoox, and you can check out the page. There's a whole bunch of them. But essentially, Blackbird's one of Australia's and New Zealand's top venture capital companies with I think $1 billion under management at the moment.
Wow. With all these like really great opportunities that Startmate and Blackbird offer, how do venture capital firms and like accelerators and things decide what companies and people to invest into to like maybe find the next Canva?
Yeah, great question. And I think you hit the nail on the head there with finding the next Canva. The venture capital game, it's really determined by the outliers. So we really want to invest in people who we think are doing their life's work. When a venture capital company invests in a startup, they're really looking for a long-term relationship because each fund has quite a long lifetime to it. So when you invest in someone's company, you're really creating a long-term partnership. So when you invest, is this founder someone who has a real strong affinity to the market or the problem they're trying to solve? Do they have a deep love of the product? That's a big one with Blackbird. And also, the companies like Blackbird and Startmate really want to invest as early as possible. So I guess, how do you support great people doing great things, essentially? In terms of the sort of industries that Startmate and Blackbird invest in, it's quite industry agnostic. So we love people who have massive ambitions, like not just focusing here on the local Australian and New Zealand market, but that they have plans for actually growing globally. And the reason why that is venture capital companies really work with the outliers. So you have, let's say you bring in a fund of 10 to 20 companies. The reality is a lot of those companies will end up failing. Some will do all right, but what happens is the one or two outliers on the positive end who exceed all expectations and really take on large global markets lift up the rest of the losses from the other companies that occurred. So that's kind of the business model behind VC, and that's why you're really looking for founders who actually have that global ambition, because for the founders who do succeed in actually creating those companies, you need them to really, I guess, offset the rest of the fund as well.
And sort of a follow-up, what are some of the common traits of startups that VC firms are looking for? Like, what do they, what sort of things that make them successful?
In terms of the startups themselves, what makes the startups successful?
Yeah, the startups themselves.
Yeah. First one I'd say is a really deep understanding of a customer problem. So startups, it's quite often, as a student especially, if you're creating your own business, you might think of an idea and perhaps not actually look too much into actually what problems people are facing. So you might have this awesome idea, but it's not actually solving a major customer pain point. Essentially, what makes a successful business is that that a company is solving a big enough pain point for someone that they're willing to pay for it, and there's enough people who are having that same pain point that the market's big enough that they'd pay for it. That's really like the crux of what would make a successful business model. And we really look for, firstly, founders who have the vision to really take things globally and have that bigger vision than what's just here. Also, I guess some sort of traction. Like, does the market actually love their product? And you'll see with Canva as well. So Canva's first, I think. I'm not sure if Cam's still here, and he'd be able to correct me if he was. But their first, I think, 50,000 customers was purely based off like SEO and word of mouth, just because they were solving enough of a customer pain point. And that's a great indication of a company that could really have a big impact.
Okay. Just sort of on the flip side of that, there are lots of like successful startups funded by venture capital, but there's also like even more unsuccessful ones, right? That's just the nature of the game. So what do you think are some of the most common reasons startups with VC backing fail?
With VC back?
Yeah.
I'd say, just a disclaimer here, that I'm not actually in the investments team within Startmate, but I do deal closely with Blackbird and Startmate's investment teams. I'd say one of them would be perhaps if you invest really early stage, perhaps they haven't quite got that product market fit yet. So you're more investing to actually test whether there is something there. Also, I guess further down the track, perhaps they didn't scale early enough that competitors actually came in. You often, I mean, if a founder's really onto something and they don't scale soon enough, you could have that international pressure coming through. I'd also say, another point would probably be perhaps the founding team the wrong team can often lead to a bad outcome as well. I know that's quite a standard blanket statement, but the team is actually the most important thing when it comes to the company, and perhaps there's not great chemistry between the founders and investors as well. That's probably the extent of my knowledge there. I wouldn't be able to answer too much more around that one, though, I don't think.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting to hear about, the positives and negatives of VC. Would you be able to maybe go on the other side? You've worked at a startup and you're involved in the Startmate quite a lot. So would you be able to explain the process for how startups get funding, and maybe walk us through that for any students who may be thinking of building a startup and eventually want to get VC funding?
Yeah, totally. First things first, there are a number of different ways to get funding. So I guess if you're an early stage founder, the first most common way is probably family, friends. And then probably next stage on from that, you could look towards angel investors, syndicates. With a company, with VCs and a company like Startmate as well, there are two ways we kind of come across different deals. One is a cold reach out. So it's very regular that founders would actually reach out to Startmate and Blackbird, and that's a great thing. We love it when people do that, just because it's quite hard to actually have full knowledge of, I guess, all the amazing companies that are actually out there. That's probably the first way that we actually have awareness of your company. The second one, I guess, is, I mean, the VC industry is constantly growing, and we're at that inflection point where I think the tech space and the startup space in general is really going to rocket upwards from here. And VC is actually putting a lot more money into scouting programs. So I guess it is kind of self-explanatory, but scouts kind of go out and actually seek where these amazing companies. The process of actually going for funding, perhaps I think it's usually around you sort of, I guess, it's really important that you have your story really down pat. VCs and accelerators are quite tired for time. Like, think about how many companies they actually have to look at. Like, I know I was speaking to Nick Crocker the other day, who's one of the partners at Blackbird, and he sees a lot of pitches. Like, it is very, very common that perhaps your initial pitch will get rejected or something like that. Purely is because of a numbers game. Like, they get sent so many pitches. So it's really important, first of all, that you have a really clear value proposition. You're really succinct, I guess, with your story that you tell. Like, storytelling is actually really important to grasp the VC or accelerator's attention. Following on from this, you'll probably have to do a pitch to the VC, and then they'll, depending on the size of the funding, usually if it's smaller, it's not too much due diligence that has to occur, but they'll run it by the rest of the investment team and actually see whether this is a company that makes sense. In saying that, perhaps the VC has a similar company in their portfolio already, there might be a bit of a conflict of interest, so might not be able to go down that route either. With Startmate in particular, there's like an application process. So we have quite a large number of companies and startups apply, and then it's like an application process. The one thing about Startmate is we're a mentor-driven community. So the people who really drive our investment decisions are a group of amazing mentors who invest their time and money to really help support the next generation of startups, and they're the ones who kind of make the decision, and then we take through a cohort of 20 or so companies. With that though, it's a tricky balance. Like, I know as a student, it can be quite hard to sometimes have the courage, like my idea is not good enough, it's not developed enough. A lot of VCs actually would love to join you on the journey as soon as possible, like really becoming like lifelong partners with your company. So it's, although you may be quite early stage, it is great to kind of get an idea of what your company is doing. The one thing I'd say there though is that you've sort of done some sort of customer discovery, or perhaps like, why do you actually need the funding? Where does the VC fit into your product roadmap ahead? Like, what are you actually testing for in that next stage of funding, and why you actually need it?
Okay. You sort of mentioned, like, obviously choosing a VC is like a big deal, especially if like the VC goes with you for like the entire duration of your startup, right? So if you're founding a startup, how do you choose a VC firm, since the VC market is like growing a lot too? Like, what should founders look for in their VC firms?
Yeah, great question. I'd say two main things. This is probably not the answer you're looking for, but it's actually the reality, is a personal connection with the VC. Like, you are stuck with whoever that person is. They'll be on your board for the next 10 years at least. So whoever you invest in, you really want a personal connection, and you really want that VC to actually really care about the product and problem you're solving. I mean, the second sort of thing you can look at is the past success of that venture capital company. So what sort of companies have actually come through their portfolio in the past? And what you can do there is actually reach out to some of those other founders. So reach out to founders where this particular VC has been an investor, and just ask them for their experience. That's probably the easiest way to actually work out whether they're a good cultural fit as well with your company. It's not exactly always about just the dollars. It's that human and support element is actually really important too.
Oh, yeah, it's interesting to hear. Never heard about that, the personal connection part, but I can definitely see why, when you're stuck with, yes, if your startup goes on for many years, yes, if you don't have a good relationship, then.
Long time.
Yeah, okay. And I think we'll just move on to maybe a bit more about Startmate specifically. So, wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about Startmate, maybe any exciting opportunities you have coming up for students. Maybe
Yeah,
share some slides.
Yeah, I do have some slides if you'd like me to share.
Yep, that'd be great.
Yeah,
sure.
I have a large screen sharing. So.
Perfect.
Is it on? There's always one or two technical difficulties.
There we go. Can you see that all right?
Yep, awesome.
Yeah, perfect. So yeah, as I mentioned before, Startmate is, I guess the tagline is the epicenter for startup ambition. And the reason we say this is, really, Startmate has a few different components, and it's always driven towards one thing. I guess, how can we make the next generation of really amazing companies coming out of Australia and New Zealand successful? How do we lead to company success? And there are three things in that. So we have our accelerator program. So this is what you'd see more traditionally Startmate as being. So it's more around the investment. So any company who comes through Startmate's accelerator gets $75,000 in return for 7.5% equity. Now, the accelerator, Startmate's produced a number of really amazing companies. I'll touch on that in the next slide, but that's only one part of who Startmate is now. The second part of Startmate is you need really great investors, and not only investors, but actually investor diversity. If you have a lack of diversity in the investors in the startup ecosystem, you actually have a lack of diversity of companies coming through. And one crucial thing with actually investing in companies is that you have your own unique investment thesis. So the First Believers program of Startmate is really around creating a program where people who perhaps weren't traditionally into investing are now able to have the opportunity to get more involved. Now, the one that's probably most relevant here for the students, and I'll be touching on the student fellowship since I'm the student fellowship associate as well, is our fellowship program. So the fellowship's really about how do we allow more talented students and individuals to actually enter the startup ecosystem. So we actually have 3 fellowship programs. So the Women's Fellowship, which is about talented women coming from more corporate roles into startups. Software Engineers Fellowship, which is more around people who've been working in the engineering industry for a little while, making the transition over. And then the one that's most relevant here is the Student Fellowship. So the Student Fellowship, how do we get talented uni students into startup roles? You'll see here on the left, that's actually the Startmate team. Given we've been in lockdown for 2 years, I haven't actually met a number of them there. So hopefully back when life returns to normal, we can actually all meet up in one place again. And just out of interest as well, so Startmate was actually featured on the front cover of the Australian's Innovators magazine. So an interesting story there for anyone who's interested. Cool. So yeah, Startmate's invested in over 150 companies now with a collective portfolio valuation of 1.87 billion. You'll see here with the companies that Startmate's actually invested in, it's very industry agnostic. So, I mean, you've got a company like Cake, that's a company that helps work out equity distributions with employees and founders. Adore Beauty, which is an e-commerce beauty store. Fable, I'm not sure if there's any Guzman y Gomez fans out there, but Fable is actually a plant-based substitute for meat, where they're using mushrooms to actually replace meat. Barty turning waste into pet products as well. A number of other like legal here. So point I'm trying to make there is like startups come in all shapes and sizes. You ask like, what does Startmate invest in before? The reality is, if it's a founder who has where this is their life's work and they're really passionate and have big ambitions for their company, that's definitely one we'd look at. Now, the Student Fellowship opportunity, it's a 2-week fully sponsored virtual bootcamp held in the winter and summer student holiday period. You hear from like amazing speakers. So last time there were 35 amazing speakers across 2 weeks. I'll touch on those later, but following this, there are actually paid internship opportunities. So we had students landing in companies like Zora, which is an NFT marketplace, Swoop Aero, Blackbird as well. I think one actually went to Canva, Airwallex, a number of really great companies. Students also receive one-on-one mentoring from some amazing coaches who are actually in their field of interest. And then I guess the biggest one here is that students really join a community for life. So Startmate community is a really supportive one. And out of everyone who went through the last fellowship, I'd say 70% of people said that the community was actually the best aspect. Just being surrounded by other ambitious people and and just like learning along the process. I won't touch on this too long, but this is the timeline coming up. The key one here, deadline's actually on October the 3rd, so get your applications in. This is our last cohort that actually went through. So as you can see, all across Australia and New Zealand. Great way to actually meet some amazing people from all over our 2 countries. Coaches came from all of the top startups and scale-ups across Australia and New Zealand. So we actually had 131 coaches from these companies. You'll see here our speakers. So this is Luke Ania. So Luke Ania is the founder of Safety Culture, another one of Australia's unicorns. We had Robin Denholm as well. So Robin is actually the chair of Tesla. So you'll hear from an amazing array of guest speakers too. And it's a bit of fun. So this is our trivia night we had on the first evening. Overall though, I think for a lot of people who were perhaps interested in this area or not even necessarily interested yet, they really found a home in the Student Fellowship and can really see the value of actually working in this space. I'll just stop sharing now, but it really is an exciting space to be in as a student. I know back when I went through uni, it wasn't a major focus of a lot of the faculties, but the startup ecosystem is a really exciting space to be in. And of all times, now is also a really special time. You're having a lot of the past generation, so all the the people who actually built companies like realestate.com, Seek, they're coming back to actually found their own companies. They've had all this amazing startup experience, and that whole sector in Australia is just looking to explode. It's already Australia's third largest industry, the tech sector, and not just tech, but startups as well. But it's a really unique time for students to actually join. So if that's an opportunity of interest, definitely jump on it, and happy to answer any questions over LinkedIn or anything as well.
Yeah, it sounds like such a good opportunity. Actually, to anyone in the audience, I really think that if this interests you, you should go check it out, because I think it's like a really good opportunity if you're interested in startups at all. But other than the Startmate Student Fellowship, what other ways can students get involved in startups or in startup culture?
Yeah, great question. It's one that I really struggled with back when I was at uni. Like, I always had the desire to actually get into startups, but I never knew how to actually do it until I found a group of friends who were interested in the space as well. First things first, and I think Cam kind of mentioned this as well, is just put yourself out there. Just attend events in the ecosystem. You'll start seeing the same faces over and over, and really build a solid network. Like, the network's actually quite important. Like, just being surrounded by other ambitious people who are doing amazing things, like, it's a really great way to do it. Also, just perhaps following some industry leaders. So people like, if you look at Blackbirds, like the Nick Crockers, Nikki Shavaks, Rick Bakers, just getting all their first-hand knowledge of their experiences in startups, and actually like learning from that. I'd say also joining, I'm not giving you guys a plug, but joining a society where you can actually be surrounded by people who also are interested in this space. And it's not like you have to be sold on the idea of entering the startup space, but actually just being surrounded by other people to actually test your curiosity as well is a really great opportunity. You also have peak bodies. So in Victoria, we have Launch Vic and Startup Vic, and they collate a lot of the events going on in the ecosystem. I'm not too sure what the New South Wales equivalent is there, but you'll have quite a lot going on there as well. The other thing I'd say with startups is just put yourself out there. I mean, like, even if you're interested in becoming a founder, there are a lot of these great resources at your fingertips. The one thing about the startup ecosystem is it's very giving, and you kind of can see that with Cameron Adams, like, rocking up to that as well. The whole system kind of works by giving back constantly, and you can learn a lot by just reaching out to people as well. If there's someone you really admire their work and what they've done, being respectful of their time, obviously, but you can actually learn a lot just by doing that too. So just to summarize, get out there, go to events, be surrounded by other people who are exploring those curiosities as well, and just get that kind of good source of information coming in. So follow, for instance, you can follow the Startmate newsletter as an example.
Yeah, so I guess the takeaway is just look for your own opportunities, right?
Yeah, totally. Like, one of Startmate's like awesome interns. We don't even refer to him as an intern. He's like head of launch ops now at Startmate, because he's done so much. Like, he's progressed through. But he got his initial opportunity at Startmate actually by tweeting at our CEO, Michael Batko. So it's not necessarily as traditional as you might think. It's really, if you really align with a company and you really align with the founder's vision, just reach out to them. It's not the worst thing that can happen. Same thing if you're looking for investment. I was speaking to Nick Crocker, one of the partners, the other day as well, and he was mentioning if someone came up to him and said, I'm really struggling to get a foot in the door with VCs, and he said, how many have you actually gone and spoken to? And the person said 24. I got rejected by 24, and he's like, come back when you've been rejected by 40, because it can be a numbers game. Like, the more the more doors you knock on, obviously being respectful to other people, but you'll open up some amazing opportunities. So just explore and enjoy the ecosystem and everything that's available for you.
Yeah, sounds great. Just a question from the Slido about the student fellowship. So what are you guys at Startmate looking for when selecting students for the fellowship?
Yeah, great question. So, and it was actually kind of the same stuff that Cam mentioned, so it was similar sort of trains of thought there. But I guess people who I just guess like to get stuff done. So, I mean, you've got your coursework, but what sort of stuff are you actually doing outside of the coursework? What are you really curious about? We love curiosity. Curiosity is like the first step to actually kind of gaining new knowledge. Also, does the person, are they a community player? So are they not only looking at themselves, but I guess also trying to help those around them? I know that's quite a lot to try and pack into an application, but we'd really just love to see your personality as well. Like, we really recognize that each individual is different, and you bring something different to each one. But I'd say those are probably the main few factors. Other things that are important, but you can't really test in an application as much, is things like resilience and your ability to kind of be a jack of all trades. Those are actually quite important skills in an early stage startup, but we can probably test for that in an application process.
Wow, it's really interesting to hear that what you're looking for, and yeah, hopefully students can find it helpful and they'll apply. Maybe if you could share a link to it or
yeah,
the
definitely.
application or more information, yeah, we can.
I can check out the YouTube chat after this is done.
Okay, thanks. Okay, I think we might move on to some of the Slido questions now. I think the top one is a bit of a hot topic at the moment, being crypto. So not sure how much you're into it, but do you have any thoughts on the crypto or crypto startups?
To be honest, don't have too many thoughts. I haven't actually dabbled too much in it. I know some VCs are really, it's a divisive topic. I mean, some people are really into it. Like, they're super into it. Like, they're looking to invest. So a great person to follow if you're interested in crypto and blockchain is Tip. It's gonna be really hard to spell their last name, but Pion Somboon. So Tip was actually a principal at Blackbird who just left to actually pursue opportunities in blockchain and in particular Bitcoin. So it's from my point of view, probably wouldn't have too much of an opinion there. I think it's an exciting space. The only thing is some VCs prefer to wait until that area has kind of been established a bit more and all the kinks have been worked out and like where the real value add is. That's one general sentiment that I've heard. And I know other VCs are like really keen to jump on straight away. And I mean, if you're in that space as a founder, that's why not all VCs would be your cup of tea. Like, you might not want to have a certain VC backing you because they're not on that early stage just yet, whereas others would be really on board. But yeah, sorry, couldn't add too much more than that. I think it's pretty cool though.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, cool to hear. Could you maybe tell us a bit more about your personal journey to Startmate, how you got into it? I think, yeah, some students would be interested to
Yeah,
hear.
sure. So I guess I was always really interested in startups. Back when I went through uni, I didn't really know how to get involved. So I was actually keen to actually start a startup and ended up going to investors with this massive business plan. I had no idea about how to do it. I mean, I think they respected the effort, but it didn't quite pay off on the back end. Anyway, so was going through uni, met an awesome group of people who were running the Young Entrepreneurs Collective, and really, I guess, got plugged into the startup ecosystem there. Following this, went through the Wade Institute at the University of Melbourne, and started a startup on the back of that, which is actually in sports tech. So we were collecting stats and highlights for amateur sport, in particular basketball. So we're actually putting cameras in stadiums, and players could have their own personal highlight reel and stats card, kind of as they would in a video game like NBA 2K, for anyone who plays that out there. Now, COVID unfortunately hit during that time, so the whole market kind of got sapped up, and then saw the opportunity at Startmate. Now, this is the same sentiment that you look at for when you invest in founders, but I had a really deep connection to what Startmate was trying to solve through the student fellowship. It was something that I felt personally connected to, and that's really about getting more talented people to actually consider startups as a career route. Now, kind of went through the whole process and eventually landed the gig at Startmate. I was always keen to enter the startup ecosystem, whether it be as a founder or working for a startup. I think that option's often underrated. You can learn a lot from some amazing founders, especially if you align with the company's vision as well. But really, that's kind of the crux of it, is just a good match as well for the current opportunities. And Startmate in particular really resonated with me as being a company who had an awesome community, really amazing community, and was really a company of growth. I actually saw the next question on the slide, and I can touch on that one off of this one as well. But the next question there was, why would students go into startups after graduating instead of going into a bigger company for experience first? And I guess at the end of the day, you always want to maximize for one thing, I'd say, at the earlier stage of your career, and wherever you think you can best get that is where I'd go, and that's to maximize your rate of learning. And everyone will say this, if you maximize for your rate of learning, that's the most important thing. If you look at, I'm not sure who studies economics here, but the more scarce your skills are, the more valuable they are down the line. So you really want to be developing skills that become really useful for the later stages of your career. Startups can offer a lot of that, in that your level of responsibility in a startup is greatly heightened due to the fact that the startup actually doesn't have the capacity to be doing a lot of stuff. So you'll have to, for your level of experience, you'll be doing a lot more than perhaps you would be in a bigger corporate. That's one part. So we've had students who have gone through internships where by the third day of the internship, they're already pitching to the Small Business Commission in Queensland or something like that, something crazy. But you really see the impact of your work. It's also a slightly different skill set. You have to learn to really juggle a lot of balls and upskill yourself quickly, because the reality is everything that you learn by the time you go into a startup, you won't know everything that you need to, and you actually have to upskill in those areas. So it's an awesome, amazing learning opportunity. And just the other part I'll touch on there, and this isn't saying anything against bigger companies either, but you really want to be surrounded by other people who are ambitious and are really, I guess, wanting to make a big change and grow themselves. Like they say that ambition attracts ambition, and in the startup ecosystem, you find that time and again and again. So there's a reason why, for instance, it's quite easy to get in touch with a lot of amazing speakers in this space, is because they're all kind of interconnected with each other, because they're all learning from each other. And with the fewer levels of hierarchy in a startup as compared to a corporate, you get access to some really amazing people a lot easier as well, just because they're a lot more accessible, and there are a lot fewer people actually between you and that sort of level of management. Especially if you join an early stage startup that's just about to grow. There's one, I think Canva was actually the example here, and I forgot exactly what position it was filling, but there was someone who filled an early Canva position, and you kind of ride a wave. Like as the company grows, you can essentially like skip a number of levels in terms of like positional hierarchy. Not that you're that interested, not that we're that interested in it, but you can actually essentially skip a number of levels purely because you've had the experience of doing a lot of stuff despite being quite junior.
Yeah, just as a last question, like you said, startups are like a really good place if you're like ambitious and want to develop yourself. But at the same time, like startups can be pretty risky for students, right? Because it's their own money and things. So how do you balance risk and ambition in your career path?
Yeah, great question. So the first thing I'll just say about startups is startups/scale-ups come in all shapes and sizes. Now, the type of work you'll be doing in an early stage startup will differ to a company that's raised perhaps like a Series C round of funding. As the earlier you are, the more general your skill set has to be, the more, I guess, hustle sort of behavior you have to have, and the more you'll be touching all levels of the startup. At the same time, it's also more risky because the less funding, the shorter the roadmap ahead where you could actually run out of cash. On the flip side, you have companies currently like Airwallex. Airwallex is quite far along, but also Linktree, CultureAmp, where they're still a scale up, so they're still scaling up quickly and there's still lots of learning opportunities there. However, the risk of them actually folding is very slim. They're on a pathway to an IPO, and it's very unlikely that company will actually fold. So when you're talking about risk, essentially if you're a student and you're not wanting as much risk in terms of the way of the company folding, the later stage companies are better compared to the earlier stage. But I'd just like to kind of reframe risk for a second. You talk about risk as the potential for the company to fold. The way I'd prefer to look at risk is the risk and the actual skills that you've actually developed through that. So if you go to Silicon Valley and you're someone who's worked in a startup and that startup's failed, that's seen as a good thing because you have all this experience working for a company. You know what works and what doesn't. Like, that's not seen as a bad thing, having that prior experience where it hasn't worked out. The fact that I did my startup and it didn't work out was actually seen as a positive thing because I had experience of actually trying it and doing it. Now, so the way I'd look at risk is actually, I guess, how valuable are the skills you've learned? Like how replaceable are you? And I guess in corporates, I don't want to speak on behalf of corporates, but I think I'd always frame it in that way as well, just beyond perhaps the company's overall outlook.
Yeah, like failure is like not always a fail, right?
No, not at all. If you're learning, I know that's like the classic cliche, but if you're learning and you're developing valuable skills, the next person who wants to hire you, they want you for those skills. They're not wanting you because your company survived. Like it's really a great indication that you've actually tried stuff, that you've put yourself out there, and that's something that's really valued in the startup space. And I know the startup space is sometimes hard to kind of understand from the outside, and that's why it's really important to kind of understand that culture just by immersing yourself in it, because learning and having that growth mindset to actually continue to push yourself and actually try something. Like, you could work for the next amazing company that comes out of this country, and there'll be a lot of them in this next generation, and that's a pretty special thing if you're wired that way. If not, you can go for a later company as well, and there's no problem as long as you're learning along the way.
Yeah, that's a really good advice. On that note, I think we're out of time for today. But thank you so much, Cam, for joining us today. We really appreciate you sharing your valuable insights and your opportunities for students. And yeah, just to reiterate to everyone in the audience, like, have a check out of the student fellowship if you're interested in anything like that. But thanks so much.
Yeah, no problem, guys. Great being here. And, I'll chuck the link in the chat as well for anyone who wants it.
Yeah. Thanks, Cam. Yeah, really appreciate all your experience.
Yeah, see you later. Have a good one.
See you.
Yeah. Thanks so much for everyone joining us today. before we go, we have some final events to share as part of Startup Week, and I think Ethan will share his screen.
Yeah. So yeah, this has been, thank you for coming to, this has been the second event of Startup Week, and we got our final event tomorrow. So hopefully, yeah, you can see this, my screen.
Yeah.
So yeah. So tomorrow we have the CC SOC and NSOC will have a Find the Founder Mixer networking event. This is where you have the opportunity to hear from two UNSW founders, where they're able to talk about their experience founding a startup and trying to find a founder. Then after this, there'll be a small breakout rooms for all participants where you'll be able to meet other startup interested students. As I think both Camerons mentioned today, it's one of the most important things, hardest things they found was meeting the right people. And I think this is going to be a great opportunity for you to be able to meet other like-minded and ambitious students who want to meet other startup interested students, both from the technical side, which more people from CSE SOC here today, and also more the business students, people from NSOC. So it's great to meet people with different skill sets who you may eventually co-found something with. Yeah, as Cameron Adams from Canva said today, yeah, you never know where these connections come from, and yeah, this event could be the start of something. So yeah, you can follow the link here, the bit.ly link I put at the top for more information at the Facebook event, and you can sign up there, and we'll be going at 5 p.m. tomorrow, so don't miss out on this.
Yep.
So yeah,
Yep.
I just want to say, yeah.
Check that out if you're interested. Thanks everyone for joining us tonight. We hope you have another great day, a great rest of the evening, and we'll see you some other time, I guess. Bye, guys.
Yes, thanks everyone. Hope you enjoyed it. Yeah, feel free to let us know if you have any
feedback
follow-ups or yeah, any feedback. Yes.